Action. Welcome to Paul's Old Ass Movie Classics. And we got a solid one today. We have the Defiant ones from 1958. And of course, joining me today is Drew Stewart. Drew, how you doing?
I'm awesome. Excited to talk about this movie.
Awesome. And you can watch this movie on Tubi. And I know we've mentioned it before, but I'm starting to become more and more of a fan of Tubi. There's just a lot of great older movies on Tubi that you can catch, all the different decades, 60s, 70s, 20s, 30s, 40s. And it's free. They'll have ads, so it's kind of like an old school, it's almost like AMC, and it's really been a great resource for us. Even watching this film, like the next ones, it's just like, oh, like I want to see that one. I want to see that one. I want to see that one. So if you haven't checked out Tubi, guys, again, it's free. You can download it, whether you have Roku, Apple, check it out. And this
It
movie's
really is awesome. And it's like algorithm is super like it's just tons of Clint Eastwood recommendation. Like it's awesome.
yeah. It's pretty great. Uh, you, this is directed by Stanley Kramer, who also directed Sidney Poitier in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and he also directed the World War II Judgment at Nuremberg. Those are two great films, so check those out if you haven't seen them yet. And this is written by Nedrick Young, who apparently was blacklisted, part of the whole what was they called? The something 10. Um
The Hollywood, like the Hollywood 10, like
yeah,
the
Hollywood 10. There you
yeah.
go. Hollywood 10. He also wrote Jailhouse Rock and Inherit the Wind, which he was nominated for an Oscar for, as well as Harold Jacob Smith, the other writer. He also was nominated in Inherit the Wind, and he also wrote The River's Edge. And yeah, there's a cool little tribute that they have because they weren't credited, I believe, or something like that. And so they had like the written by credits, and they're the actual actors on it. So it was like a Stanley Kramer's little homage to him. So a little cool thing. And this stars Tony Curtis, Sidney Poitier, of course, and then Cara Williams. Premise of this film: two chained together escaped convicts, white and black, must learn to get along in order to elude capture. IMDb rating 7.6, box office 778,000, and it grossed 2.75 million. So very good return. So Drew, let's get into it. What was your favorite thing about the film?
I really liked it. My favorite thing is the two gentlemen behind me. There's a lot I could talk about. I thought that the script was strong. I thought the direction was strong, but I just these two actors and got their just due for it. They were each nominated for an Academy Award for leading role, which I thought was interesting, especially for Poitier because given the time could have easily just tried to subjugate him to a supporting role.
Mhm.
But I loved the fact that they got recognized. I thought they were just incredible together. I am not super familiar. I've seen Tony Curtis in some of his hits, but not in a long
Doesn't
time.
seem like it's hot, right?
Yeah, and not in a long time. And man, did I really appreciate him in this movie, as sort of the foil and the opposite to Poitier, and to watch his evolution. And I mean, Sidney, my guy, like I don't know what to say other than he is incredible in
Yeah.
everything that I've ever seen him in. I think we said this when we did A Raisin in the Sun. You just can't take your eyes off of him. I mean, from the moment he starts to sing, and that haunting sort of, song that he's got going as the thread sort of at the beginning and then throughout. Just these two and the way in which they portrayed their characters, the real chemistry that they had, and the risk that they took, along with the filmmakers for the time. It's not 1948. It's probably, the civil rights movement is building some momentum in 58, but it's not
It's 58.
but
Yeah.
it's not 1998. And
Oh,
the risks that they took and just the performances that they delivered and the message they sent, I just loved it, and I loved their performances.
yeah, for sure. And going back, you kind of mentioned it, but I definitely don't want to skip over this. Just so you guys understand the film that we're watching, this did win the Oscar for Best Writing, Story, and Screenplay. And Nedrick Young went under the pseudonym Nathan E. Douglas, and then it was restored. So that's why we're watching it now. It just says Nedrick Young, but at the time, he was not given it. And this also won for best cinematography, black and white. Again, also, if you're not familiar, when with the introduction of color and when more color films started coming out, the Academy on the cinematography level would separate because there were you don't want to you can't compare a black and white film to color film, and so they would separate it. And I don't remember when it ended, but I want to say it was in the 60s when they stopped doing black and white
And
film.
that I haven't read much about this film, but that couldn't have been an accident, right? That even though color was now in medium, that they chose black and white for this film on the themes that it had. Like it feels like that had to have been intentional, and it was great.
Yeah, I haven't read anything that says that. A lot of times the choice was more just purely about money.
Okay.
Black and white was cheaper than color. So I don't know if it was, I mean, obviously that would make a lot of sense.
Well, I'll just read into it, and I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously it would make a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
about black and white. Let's keep black and white. But yeah, typically it was 99% monetary.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this was nominated for Best Picture, with Stanley Kramer, of course, as the producer. Also nominated, like you mentioned, Tony Curtis in a leading role, Sidney Poitier. And this was the first time an African American had been nominated uh, for Best Actor. So
For leading role, right?
for leading role, yeah, because the Gone with the Wind, what was her
Mhm.
name? Maddie Hayes, or
Yeah.
forget, but she was the first African American ever be nominated. But Sidney Poitier, this was his first nomination. And then Best Actor in a Supporting Role, Theodore Bickel. And then Cara Williams got Best Actress in a Supporting Role nominated. And Stanley Kramer got nominated Best Director. And Best Film Editing, Frederick Knudsen got nominated. So, guys, that's 9 Oscar nominations with 2 wins. So you're talking arguably one of the greatest films of all time, just based off of nomination and merit. So again, that was a big reason why we chose this film. And I'm with you. I ultimately enjoyed this film. I think I think definitely given the time period, like again, you're really up against the edge on what people's tolerance is for some of these themes, and hitting home maybe for a lot of people. And it's real too, you know what I mean? I mean, like, and a lot of people want to say like racial tensions or whatever now, and sometimes I'm just like, have you like just watch something older, because those are more legit, because now people have been brought up, again, the South was just a different country, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just don't think you can compare racial tensions in the 1950s compared to any, like, or anything before that. Like it's part of life, versus now I think you have bad apples, but I don't think it's as harsh as it was back then.
Yeah, I
And
mean, there's always work to do, right? But
of course,
it's not 1958. 1958, it was everything. It
yeah,
defined
and
what was happening in America at the time.
absolutely. And there's like one of the scenes is, like probably a little after the middle, kind of towards the end, where they run into Billy, the little kid, and all he end up kind of falling, gets his head knocked out, and he wakes up, and Sidney Poitier is trying to make sure he's okay, and Billy runs away from him and just runs to the white prisoner and is like, hey, save me, he's gonna hurt me, and again, like that's like legit, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it didn't even feel like forced. It felt very natural. It felt like, yeah, that's how a little white kid would respond, because that's how he was taught, and that's how things were. That, because this takes place in the South. I forget exactly where it took place, but I know it takes place in the South.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, this was a very defining film for this time period. One of the better ones when it comes to dealing with these themes and topics. And again, just the the performances between these two. I mean, again, like they had real hate, you know, towards each other. And I think the other part that I really enjoyed was, besides the cinematography, which was very noticeable how really great it was. Like even towards the end, there was like a rack focus shot, which is not popular during those times, and like Sidney Poitier is like in the foreground, and Tony Curtis was in the back, and they rack focus, like it was a great shot. But just the physicality of this film and what these actors went through, I did a little research on that, and they had stunt doubles for a few things, but for the most part, they really did it, and you could feel it. And I think, again, like lesson to filmmakers, like, yes, have stunt people for sure, because obviously you can't do everything, but at the same time, you know, if that's part of the character's journey, and you fake it, it comes across on screen. Whereas these guys were tired and it looked it, and you can't necessarily always act that. Like you need to feel what these characters felt, and it really really showed throughout the film, and really gave this film a real genuine authenticity.
I'm I'm glad you said that because I think their physical interactions were just as important as anything that they said.
Yeah,
Like what, like obviously they're shackled together, right? So they hate each other at the beginning, but they can't escape each other because they're locked together.
yeah,
And to watch them get physically closer and closer to each other and take risks that they certainly would not have probably at the beginning, like they went from fighting each other to trying to help each other out of the pit. This scene right here is like they're not locked to each other anymore, but like when he's trying to get him onto the train with him, and his hand goes over him and he just can't quite do it. Their physical closeness as the in a completely um non yeah
sexual. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I don't mean it
yeah.
to make it sound like it's sexual at all, but their physical closeness as their characters evolved was really important, and like you said, just something you can't fake.
Yeah, and I think that's what made the ending work, was because this definitely wasn't a Hollywood ending. This was a good ending in a lot of different ways. But like you're talking about, it ended them basically holding each other, and they did as far as they could, and they tried and it didn't work out. And Portier decided to go all out to save him, and it didn't work. And instead of him just worried about himself, because he had helped him, it was like, we ride together, die together, bad boys. And ultimately they chose to die together. And I think that just worked, because I mean, it would have been nice that they got on the train, of course, and that would have been a nice happy ending. But in a lot of ways, that ending was stronger thematically, because again, whether it's them, like, again, just holding each other at the end, because that was the end. uh
Right.
it was
And
nice.
I agree, and I don't think there's no reason to believe that either of them were falsely accused of the crimes they committed, right? Like I don't remember at any point in the movie it making it seem like they're innocent of anything.
um i thought I thought their crimes weren't as big as they made it sound. Like
Well,
I
that's
thought Portier was a little bit of, like, he's arrested more because he's black versus like what he did.
and that could be. And
I
so I
thought, I
guess
thought I remember a scene in the beginning that they
yeah,
said.
I would need to rewatch that to just to
Yeah,
catch up on
don't
that.
quote me on that one.
My point about that is more just like what they did in this case, like escaping the law, right? They're breaking the law. So at the end of the day, while we root for them, like justice is served.
Yeah, they're still
They don't
convicts.
they don't loose the dogs on them, thankfully. So they just kind of scoop them up. And but in a way, like they've won their freedom in a different way, right? Like they've won the freedom from the bigotry and from the kind of their inner demons with each
Yeah.
other. So even though they're caught, you can tell that they're at peace. So that part is kind of nice. So I agree. It's not a typical Hollywood ending, but in a way they have been set free, it feels like.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, I think we kind of answered it, but does this movie hold up?
Yeah, I think so for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think for me, and I always say this, I would have liked a little more pronounced score. I think that really could have added a whole nother element to this film.
There was, I don't think really any music at all.
No, just the singing, just that little
And
song.
then like occasionally picking out something up off the radio or something.
Yeah.
But
But that's what I mean. Like for again, that's more of my own style. That's what I prefer. But yeah, overall, I think this movie works. I think it's enjoyable.
I
I
think it's well
I think
shot, well scripted, well made,
yeah,
well acted, the whole thing.
yeah, for sure. Contemporary comparison.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. I mean mine I think is pretty like obvious, but this definitely had kind of the fugitive vibes to it. Where it's like, you have literally the train, prisoners in a bus that breaks, and then the manhunt begins, and you have the scene with the sheriff and they go searching. So, for me, it was definitely had that vibe to it.
Yeah,
Um, I was trying to think something of the buddy comparisons, a little bit of Lethal Weapon in that way
yeah.
with Mel Gibson, Danny Glover. I can see a little bit of that comparison. Um,
Yeah, I was thinking it's not perfect and it's less serious, but I was thinking, oh brother, where art thou? Um
yeah, I couldn't quote that movie if I tried.
yeah, it's pretty good. George Clooney and John Turturro and John Goodman.
Yeah, for
Um
sure.
Criminals on the Lam, kind of the same thing.
Should this movie be remade today, and who should it star?
I don't know that it needs to be honest with you. And I feel like it has been remade in certain ways, right? Like,
Sure.
but buddies on the run from the law is
Yeah.
not a new phenomenon. So I don't know that it needs to be remade, but not because it's not great. I just think it's really good, and I don't know that a modern treatment would make it that much better, to be honest with you.
I would only do it if I could get two absolute powerhouses. And for me, you would have to get like Denzel Washington, and the second guy, I mean, you can go, there's a lot of different routes you can go with the other guy. Um, Trying to think who's got kind of it was kind of angry.
I tried to skew a little bit younger, only because Denzel's sneaky old now. Although I've been on a huge Denzel kick since we did Crimson Tide. I love that guy.
The only reason why I'm saying Denzel is because just like Sidney Poitier is the
He has an
greatest
eternal
actor
fire.
in
Yeah.
generation. Again, if I'm gonna remake it, it's like I don't want to remake it with actors that can't even sniff Sidney Poitier. So Denzel Washington can,
Yeah.
and he's in that conversation. And so that's the only that again that would be the only way I would want to watch it is with Denzel Washington.
I agree. Oh, shoot. Yeah, another contemporary comparison. And my guy that I would have be in this is Mahershala Ali, and
Okay. Yeah.
he kind of did a movie, not the same exact, but like The Green Book with Viggo Mortensen.
Oh yeah, that would be a
It,
great comparison.
it
Yeah.
kind of have like a similar kismet. Like Viggo is less outwardly horrible that as Tony Curtis was, but you can see him evolve and that relationship evolve.
And then
But
the
my other,
Italian, that's a
yeah.
good mixture. Yeah.
And then I was thinking if I didn't want to just like run those two back together, I was thinking maybe Jesse Plemons. I think it could be good.
Yeah. I just saw him in Kinds of Kindness, and
He's great. Like he could play a scumbag, but I could see him play the guy that kind of evolves.
yeah.
Uh,
Awesome, Drew. Well, that's gonna lead us into the obvious category, and we've been waiting for this one. I think this film, at least for me, made me feel like I can actually do this list. And there's still many films we need to continue to watch of Sidney Poitier, but we want to do best Sidney Poitier films. I now have seen over five. I think I've seen six or seven now, and so I have a good grasp. But I know again, I know I know true Sidney Poitier fans might not completely agree. So mine's going to be a combination, a little bit of my own personal experiences, because remember he was really old
When we were young.
when we were younger, and so but I remember the first film I've seen with him, so I kind of combined a little bit of nostalgia and just what he's actually known for and what I've seen and all that stuff. So let's start with number five.
All right. Number five for me, and it probably should be higher. But it's been long enough since I've seen it that I just feel less confident talking about it. But I have seen it, and it's I think the first film where he won an Academy Award, and it's Lilies of the Field. And he plays kind of uh a itinerant worker, like handyman type fellow, and comes across these nuns out in the middle of nowhere, and they kind of sort of dupe him into building a chapel, but like watching him change and evolve with it and with them and kind of the themes. It's great.
Yeah. Um, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go my number five. This is again the first thing that I ever saw him in. We watched it in school, but it was Separate but Equal. He
Mm,
plays Thurgood Marshall before he became the judge, but it was him as a lawyer in the classic, Brown versus Board of Education. So I love the film, one because that was really like my one of my first real introduction into civil rights stuff and history. And again, obviously a monumental American case, and then obviously just seeing a great actor go. And again, I was not old. I want to say I was like 10 or 11 when this movie came out. And so this came out in 91. So I was 11, I believe, when I saw this. So again, seeing a great actor, I didn't necessarily know who Sidney Poitier was at that time, but it was a great introduction, I think. And so that's going to be my number five. My number four, I'm gonna go with this one, Defiant Ones. I think for me it was between this and the other one we had seen, A Raisin in the Sun, but I think I'm just gonna choose this one just because again, like um the the chemistry with Tony Curtis
yeah.
and and again just the physicality of this role. A lot of people don't give a lot of credit, so or excuse me, maybe it's underrated, the credit for actors on a really truly physical role, but I do, because remember you're also doing multiple takes. You like it's not just you
Exhausting.
you're not it's not just that 6 7 shot. You're doing that three or four times, and who knows what the weather's like, all that good stuff. And so it really can be a grueling experience. And he didn't really have a ton of stunt double work on this, so I want to give him a shout out for that. So that's my number four.
Love it. Number four for me, speaking of sort of our childhood and first films, I think probably the first film I saw of his, and this is still one of it's probably my top 20 personal favorite films, is Sneakers,
Oh yeah.
um, with Robert Redford and him, and just an unbelievable cast. And I can't remember his real name, but Ned Ryerson and his other
Yeah.
most notable role.
Yeah.
I love that movie. It was kind of like an intro. It was safe enough that my parents let me watch it pretty young, like when I didn't used to watch too many movies. I don't think it was like PG-13, but kind of like an
Was
intro
PG-13, yeah.
intro for me to like espionage film and Redford and Poitier later in their careers, and I thought it was great. So
Yeah.
Sneakers, and then three for me, we're talking about it right now, is this movie, The Defiant Ones. I it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I really wanted to, spoiler, I really wanted to include Sneakers on mine, but the Separate but Equal
Yeah.
basically took that spot. And there's no person in their right mind that can put all of his 90s films over his
No,
work in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so it was a casualty of war, but I'm glad you,
it was definitely just like a personal thing for me because
yeah. You
that
put
movie.
two films, you put two films that I what didn't put on mine, but I wanted to acknowledge. So I'm
Yeah,
glad our lists are very complimentary right now.
yeah, good.
Uh, my number three is going to be In the Heat of the Night. Again, we also watched that here, and that was fantastic. And again, a lot of for the similar reasons of this film, it's just really diving deep in the time period. It's just crazy how these films are being made in the time that it's happening, and I they were both fantastic. And again, I think they were really edgy and trend setting in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I love that. And then my number two is this is probably my first old film that I ever saw of him, and it's To Sir with Love. And I remember watching this in school as well, like junior high, I want to say.
Oh well.
Shout out Mrs. LeBeau. I believe she showed this film to us, and yeah, this was my real. Again, I'd already seen him Separate but Equal, and then now seeing him To Sir with Love. Like this was a real powerful role for him, and that's why it's my number two.
Nice. My number two was your number three, In the Heat of the Night. Great movie. I want to watch it again. I mean, good enough that it spawned like a TV series,
Yeah,
as a homage with Carol Connor, I think.
yeah,
Um, and just a really good movie. And like you said, again, just his decade or so of taking on roles, challenging the status quo at various points in the civil rights struggle, and kind of watching his evolution and the evolution of the characters through that. Just, it's great. I mean, he really was. The more I'm watching his films, the more I'm realizing how important obviously for very good reasons, we hear a lot of the social activist names in Martin Luther King Jr. and
yeah,
Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and a lot of these folks. But here was Sidney Poitier kind of doing it from inside the establishment,
yeah.
in Hollywood, and just crushing it, every step of the way. So In the Heat of the Night is great.
Yeah,
And
he's just as important because again, like not everybody will necessarily watch the news or like be able to necessarily see the impact like a Martin Luther King. I'm talking about more during this time period.
yeah,
They may not be able to see, hands-on what Martin Luther King is doing versus when you are tapping into a medium like film, whereas you go and see this and maybe you're just like, oh, I'm a Tony Curtis fan. I want to see this film. And then you see the film and the themes, and then you're seeing Sidney Poitier, and you're just like, wow, like this guy is really good. And then maybe your beliefs start changing a little bit, or maybe you learn something that you didn't learn before. And so, Sidney Poitier is just as important as Martin Luther King. Obviously, very different, and not trying to take away either of them, but
no,
I don't want to minimize Sidney Poitier's impact on the civil rights movement because this guy, again, was breaking through Hollywood at a time where that's almost impossible. And he was, I've never, I need to read his biography because I'd like to hear more on the behind the scenes stuff because I don't know exactly what he went through, but I just know the impact, and he was revolutionary, and really paved the way for many successful black actors, filmmakers, the whole nine. So
yeah, I think that's a super interesting point you made about, like, especially if you're a person that is, maybe you have your biases, maybe you think you have your mind made up about what's happening in the country socially. Um, but like you said, movies, like music, reach
yeah,
people in a different way,
oh yeah,
right? Maybe because it's fictionalized or whatever, you can connect with it in a safer way if you're not ready.
yeah,
and you see like, whoa, like these guys, they came together. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So
Yeah, because maybe your guard's down a little bit more, right? Because you're just like, I'm just gonna go see a movie. Like, I'm not necessarily, I want to get away from all the politics. And then you go see a movie and you're like, oh wow, like, again, maybe your mind's just more receptive in a movie theater versus, listen, like, I guess at that time, listening to the radio or, watching Walter Cronkite or whatever.
yeah, 100%. And then my number one was one that we did a while ago, early on, and I to me still stands up there as an incredible work. And again, for the same reasons we talked about then, that this crew had done this 1,000 times on stage before they put
Yeah.
it on film. For me, it's a Raisin in the Sun.
Wow. I'm surprised that you didn't have the same number one as me. But once I started to, I have seen this film. I would love to see it again. But, you know, growing up, once I kind of learned more when I started to learn about film and more when I started to take a academic approach to film, this was one of the performances and this was one of the movies that was always listed in all the textbooks and all that stuff. And it's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. They did a remake with Bernie Mac, but again, like just super revolutionary. This was, a comedy. And so this really like pushed the envelope with all the subject matter that we're talking about. And again, now we're seeing a different side of Sidney Poitier and just really seeing his charisma and humor and the true star power
Yeah,
that he has. Like this film that we just watched, Defiant Ones, is still very early in his career and is a defining one. But when Guess Who's Coming to Dinner comes out, he's already well established. But now again, we get to see, yeah, this is 67 is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So he already did all those other movies that we already mentioned. And so now it's just that change of pace that it's like, oh wow, like this guy's got a little bit more to him. And I think it's just that's what when I think of Sidney Poitier, I think of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
yeah,
And I think that, and again, just the title itself, I think is just awesome.
it is
Because
great.
it tells you everything you need to know about what you're going to see. And again, they've done this movie. Obviously, there's the clean remake, but there was the James Franco movie where it was kind of similar premise. But this is a very popular theme now that
Right.
they've redone this movie a million times, and for good reason, because that was an all-time great, and that is my number one.
And the reason it's not on my list, I'm embarrassed to say, is I haven't seen
I
it.
haven't
So
seen
I'm
it.
gonna have to watch it. Yeah.
I mean, I'd be open to seeing it again. We can put it on the list. Like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm
I'll
down.
just,
I'm down to put that on the list if it's
I'm
available
gonna
on the streaming service. Well, maybe in a couple months we'll put that on there.
I'll have to suffer through Katherine Hepburn, but I'll suck it up for the
Yeah.
show.
Wait, is it Audrey Hepburn or is it Katherine Hepburn?
Catherine.
Oh, Catherine. Yeah, she's rough.
Audrey is a delight. Catherine is not.
Yeah, it's on Prime Video, so we can actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be a great one. I don't mind doing some of these big time ones because just like you're saying, I think there's a lot of people that's like, I've always heard that film, I've never seen it. So again, that's part of what the whole purpose of this podcast is. So awesome. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for us, guys. Thanks again, Drew, for coming. So you've probably seen the news, and it's sad to hear, but one of the great actors of all time, Donald Sutherland, passed away. And just a big fan of his. He's done so many great movies, whether it's been supporting, starring. I've seen several films of his. His role, for me, one of his roles that stands out was JFK. Um, just because he just had this mystery to him, and it wasn't a huge role, but uh, he always just had in Backdraft, he was excellent. Like again, those are modern films. His actual like coming of age
Yeah,
movies
his
are,
work in the 70s is great, but I think underappreciated by people our age.
oh, 100%. But again, I think a lot of people just give a shout out because Kiefer Sutherland is kind of our age group, and he's, you know, that father, just like Kirk Douglas and Michael Douglas. You know what I mean? One of the greatest families of acting of all time, and
And apparently very different. Like Kiefer is apparently not fun to work with, and I've only ever heard Donald was a gentleman. So
yeah. But yeah, and then they did a western together, Forsaken. If you haven't seen that one, I really like that one. Very solid western. Not on Tombstone's level, of course, but it's a really good western. And but yeah, so with that being said, we're gonna check out Clute from 1971. We are, because of Donald Sutherland, we're gonna break our rule of watching a non-free movie. So we will be purchasing this one to rent, but you can rent it on Apple Prime or wherever you want to rent your favorite videos. But that stars Donald Sutherland, Jane Fonda. But again, it was just important for us to honor Donald Sutherland, and then we'll also do our top Donald Sutherland films as well. So if it comes free, we'll let you know when we do the podcast as well. But
I
as
think
of
when I looked it up, it was streaming somewhere. I'm sorry.
no, it's not. But I'm okay with breaking the rule
Okay.
because we're honoring him. So again, rules are made to be broken. So
And it'll come around somewhere soon.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, anyways, it's $3.99 to rent, guys. Let's all splurge for Donald and Clute 1971. Make sure you check it out. If you haven't seen our previous episodes, we just reviewed M. We've also done Sons of Katie Elder. But yeah, keep sharing, subscribing, guys. We love the interaction. And again, if there's a movie that you guys want us to watch, please comment below and help us with suggestions. Again, the real only rubric that we have is make sure that it's on a streaming service. That's the point of this. Kind of like going to the library. We're trying to give access to, again, Tubi is a great resource. So check it out. And with that, Drew, that'll be a cut. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.